Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. This week, we're talking about meals on repeat. So, given what I do, I receive requests from media looking for experts to quote in their articles. And not long ago, there was one asking for experts to comment on a study that they say concluded eating the same meals on repeat aided weight loss. Now, I was traveling, so I missed their deadline. Lucky for us, though, we can look at it together now. So I skipped the commentary of the internet. I went directly to the study itself so we could discuss it. So it was published in Health Psychology in March of this year, so March of 2026. The study had 112 participants. 84.8% of them were women, with a median age of 52.6. The participants qualified as overweight or obese based on BMI. The average BMI of the participants at the beginning of the study was 34.5. The researchers then monitored them for 12 weeks of a behavioral weight loss program. The participants submitted food logs, and the researchers looked at two factors. The first, actually, I think we'll come to this in a second in my notes. So they had food logs through the MyFitnessPal app, and then they gave them scales. And so they had to weigh themselves every day also. The researchers had two hypotheses. So they looked at two things. The first was caloric stability, which is basically minimal fluctuations in total caloric intake day to day, and weekends versus weekdays. So that's caloric stability. The second thing was dietary repetition, measured by the percent of unique foods tracked versus the percent of foods logged 10 or more times. So they wanted to know whether these two factors, the caloric stability and the meals on repeat, the repetitive foods, predicted weight loss. The behavioral weight loss treatment was delivered entirely remotely. Participants were asked to track their calories using the Fitbit app, and then to weigh themselves on a study-provided scale daily. Now, if you're a longtime listener, you probably know that I already have some thoughts on this, but we will come back to that. So participants were randomly assigned to either A, standard condition, in which they attended weekly group sessions, or B, an optimized group where an algorithm said whether they should have a group session, a call, or a message in any given week. Now, before I get to the findings, I think that's weird. Like, I don't know why they then divided the people into two different groups, because all you did was add variables. And neither of those groups were part of what they were trying to figure out in the study. So I don't really understand why that was the case. Like, I don't know why they did that. And also in their findings, it comes back to nothing about those two things. And neither one created a control group either. So I really have no idea on that. But okay, what'd they find? So the mean or the average weight loss was 5.6% of their body weight. And they had an average of 78.8 days of valid tracking over the 12-week period. Excluding beverages and condiments, 41% of the entries were unique foods. About 60% of entries were then tracked multiple times. On average, only 1.4% of foods were tracked more than 10 times. Participants deviated from their overall calorie average by about 200 calories each day and ate approximately 50 calories more on weekends than on weekdays. So as they expected, correlations showed that more days of valid tracking were highly correlated with higher percentage weight loss. And I'm sort of like, great, we know that. That also wasn't part of what you were looking at in the study, but whatever. Okay, going to their hypotheses. So caloric stability and weight loss. They found that lower average calorie deviation predicted higher 12-week weight loss, but then they also saw that greater weekend versus weekday calorie discrepancy was associated with higher weight loss. For every 100 calorie increase on average weekend versus weekday discrepancy, weight loss was expected to increase by 0.6%. So there's a lot of factors for that we'll come back to. With regards to the dietary repetition and weight loss, they saw that more dietary repetition was associated with better weight loss. Specifically, for every 10% decrease in the proportion of foods that were unique, they also saw the percentage of foods logged more than 10 times was positively associated with weight loss. For every 10% increase in proportion of foods that were tracked more than 10 times, weight loss increased by 1.6%. Participants whose food entries were the majority repeats, they had an average weight loss of 5.9% versus those whose entries were the majority unique foods had an average weight loss of 4.3%. So they believe that limiting the dietary variety may reduce self-control burden during weight loss attempts. So practically speaking, they believe that repeating meals and snacks makes meal planning and food tracking easier, and those are some of the most effective strategies for weight loss. They also say that there's reason to believe that reducing variety overall may help participants form consistent routines that support weight loss. So, a few flags for me in this. The current study did not look at the quality of the foods at all. So they're not accounting for the healthfulness of the repeated foods. They just said that lower variety predicted weight loss when all the foods are considered together. They do admit that more research is needed, and they do admit that they didn't look at this. So they do recognize the limitations of some of what they did. To me, the whole study is a little bit silly. I don't know why we need to look at this. Either way, whatever, here we are. I think another major factor here is the length of the study. Most people, especially in the beginning, they're excited about a new thing. They could eat the same things. They're totally satisfying. After 12 weeks, they only did it for 12 weeks because after 12 weeks is when tracking tends to fall off. That's also when people are going to get bored. So if we're not looking at this, and the 4.3% versus 5.9% weight loss, so we're looking at those first 12 weeks of a program. Well, what if you had more variety and it was 4.3% in 12 weeks over and over and over versus 5.9% in the first 12 weeks, and then it went to 2 or 3% the 12 weeks after that? Which one actually, this is like a bad math problem from middle school, right? Which one actually gets us to the goal faster? I think it's the 4.3% that we're able to repeat over and over. I do agree that meals on repeat can make things easier. It's a little bit less thinking, right? We can form these routines and these habits. And at the same time, because we have an increased likelihood of boredom in the long run, it can often lead, and I see this all the time, it leads to that yo-yo cycle of the on-off thing. Because if I'm not eating those handful of meals or foods, then I must be off. We start to associate it that that's what it looks like when we're on, and anything other than that is off. I think for them to not look at the quality of the calories and only to look at the calories themselves as totals as a major caveat. And then when it talked about the caloric stability day to day versus the caloric stability weekday versus weekend, and how when there was a difference between weekday and weekend, people lost more. Could we not think of that to some degree as variety? That they were doing things on the weekend that they weren't doing during the week, and that created some level of satisfaction that might allow them to maintain over the long run. The other piece that they do include there as a qualifier is that there might be certain personality traits of the people who still tracked on the weekends that then skews the data of what they have of the difference between weekdays and weekends. So I think this study comes with a major caveat. At the same time, I think if they were to repeat this or do something again, I would love a lot more qualitative data Like I'm curious about cravings. I'm curious about personality traits and their history of dieting and all, because I think there's so much more that plays into this and of course, like you're trying to minimize variables when you're studying something. So I just think that we only want to take the implications of this study so far. And the last piece, finally, I'll say, I appreciate that they do remind us that this study is correlational, not causal. They say causality cannot be assumed in the observed relationship. So again, things that tend to move in the same direction are correlated, not necessarily that one creates the other. And maybe that's the takeaway, is that all of the headlines that come out of the studies make us think or sort of imply this causal relationship. But like this one, that's not quite the case. Mom, thoughts, questions, anything you want to add?
It's so fast. There's so many little things that could be different. You know what I mean? That could cause results to be different.
I think if it's helpful for you to eat the same things for a while, great, go for it, with the understanding that you're probably also going to have to figure out other options too in the long run. And yet for a period of time, I think it can be really helpful. Well, there you have it. Meals on repeat. Or don't. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I love hearing from you, your takeaways, your ideas, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your coach. Mom, thanks again for joining me this week.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
It was great.
Good. And of course, friends, if you are not already a member, I invite you to the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideofries.com/membership. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and above all, it supports your health. On top of access to the community board where we can interact, ask and answer questions, and so much more, you get discounts, curated content, and then of course, this week's recipe for chopped salad with chickpeas, feta, and avocado. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.